chances are you're here because you took a look at your portfolio sometime in the last 5 days, and perhaps you grabbed a trash can and threw up. Perhaps you sort of said to yourself, oh my gracious, what in the world is going on? Could there possibly be an economist close by who might explain it to me? Oh, maybe I saw a sign about one somewhere at a coffee shop in town. So tonight we're going to take a little bit of tour through the global economy, because in order to understand what's happened to your portfolio in the last 2 weeks, in order to understand what's happened to the economy in the last 6 months, you really have to understand that something extremely important economically occurred between the time that I last talked to this group in 2015 and today. Now, believe it or not, it's not the election of the president. Believe it or not, it isn't that Uber came to South Haven, because I'm personally excited about that, but it's not that. The single most important thing that's happened in the interim is this. In 2017, the global economy experienced its first year of synchronized global growth since the financial crisis. In 2017, last year, the global economy grew 3.7%. And it wasn't the kind of growth like we've all become accustomed to since the financial crisis, where maybe China's growing but the US is slow, or maybe the US has picked up but Europe is mired in a debt crisis. Growth since the financial crisis globally has been extremely what I would call patchy. It's been strong in one place but weak in another. And for some reason, we kind of all got accustomed to this. Very patchy growth worldwide. And I got to tell you, that's unusual, because if you walk away from nothing else today, I want you to understand that the norm for an economy is growth. That if an economy pretty much left to its own devices, if you just leave people alone, what do people want? They always want more. People always want more stuff. And so if you leave people alone and leave economies alone, given their own just like doing what they do, growth is what you should expect. Recessions are weird. They don't happen very often. And when you have a downturn for a long period of time, something is clearly wrong, because that is not the norm for any economy. So just keep that in mind when we talk about what happened in 2017. In 2017, the world experienced its first synchronized growth since the financial crisis. The U.S. economy grew 2.3% last year. Now, it's growing a little bit more like 4% right now, but last year it grew 2.3%. You had growth in Japan, a little less than 2%. The Chinese economy last year grew about 6.7%. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but it seems like the Chinese economy always grows about 6.7%. Have you noticed the number's always the same? So I'm guessing it's somewhere between 6 and 7, but 6.7 was the official number. Even the Russian economy managed to grow in 2017. You see, the Russian economy in 2015 and 2016 was mired in a deep, dark recession. Their economy contracted by 6% in 1 year. So even the Russian economy grew in 2017. There was growth in Central America. The big surprise last year was that Europe grew. Not just Germany, not just the Netherlands, not just France, but you also had growth in Spain, in Italy, in Greece. Growth was happening everywhere last year. And so the first thing we have to do to understand what's happening right now is sort of pick around in, why did the global economy grow pretty much everywhere in 2017? Can everybody hear me? Just kidding. Or can you just hear that noise in the background? Or is it just me? It isn't? Okay, because for a minute there, a hearing aid battery. I want a hearing aid yet. We're going to try a little. Oh, there we go. The sound man's going to handle it. Nice. Otherwise, I'm going to be in the back of the room. We're going to have to turn all the chairs around. Okay, there we go. Nice. Very good. So far, so good. You stay right there, young man. Don't you move. You're not going anywhere. Right there. So, why 2017? Why synchronized global growth? Well, there are a whole bunch of reasons, and I could bore you to death with a talk on European quantitative easing. But did anyone here come here for a talk on European quantitative easing. I didn't think so. One person wants to hear about it. We'll get to quantitative easing and interest rate policy when we talk about what's going on in the U.S. So that will happen, right? But let's just talk about what I believe is the main reason why, and something that's important to draw your attention to, and that's the role of oil prices in the global economy. You see, in 2017, oil prices stabilized around what I would call a new equilibrium for oil. You see, for all of our lives, for those of us who have been around and remember the 1970s, oil prices have acted as a global destabilizer. They've typically caused more harm than good. They've typically caused the global economy to move up and down like this. But we have now moved into a new period of time where oil prices are acting as an economic stabilizer. They're actually stabilizing economic activity, and it has to do with the change in oil production coming from the U.S. economy. So the U.S. is now producing as much oil as Saudi Arabia. Take that in for a moment. The U.S. economy now produces as much oil as Saudi Arabia because of fracking and horizontal drilling, technology that now allows us to access oil that has always been there. It was just too infinitely expensive to get at. So now we can get at that oil, and the U.S. is pumping as much oil as Saudi Arabia. So what sort of effect does that have on the global economy? Well, oil prices peaked in 2014, and they peaked at over $100 a barrel. Does anybody remember we were paying almost $4 a gallon for gas? That's what you remember, right? You remember the gas prices, right? So we remember gas prices $4 a gallon. Oil prices peaked at over $100 a barrel in 2014. But they went down in 2015. They went down and hit bottom in 2016 and got all the way down to $30 a barrel. So you go from over $100 a barrel to under $30 a barrel. That was 2016 when they bottomed out. Now, over the last year and a half, oil prices have slowly and steadily climbed back up, and we find ourselves living in this world where the new equilibrium for oil is about $60 a barrel. Now, we're on the high side of that right now because of the sanctions that are coming from Iran, but again, you don't want me to go into all that. Just believe me when I tell you that oil is now in this new equilibrium where it's about $60 a barrel, and it's trading in about a $10 range up and down around that. Now, what effect does that have on the global economy? Well, you came here to see an economist. Economists always talk about what? Supply and demand. So we're not going to be able to get away too far away from that tonight. And when we think about the effect of oil on the global economy, you really have to think about how it affects consumers, the demanders of oil, and how it affects producers, the suppliers of oil. So we're going to break it out into sort of two chunks and talk about first how consumers are affected by oil that's trading in about the $60 to $70 range right now. Well, you're all consumers. You're all affected by the price of oil. But do you care about the price of oil, or do you care about the price of gas? That's right. You care about the price of gas. Are you talking about the price of gas at your family meetings, at your dinners, with your friends around the water cooler? See, this is the very high-tech scientific way that economists figure out if oil is affecting consumers, right? Basically, if oil prices are at a level where they're not affecting consumers, it means nobody's talking about it. It means you're not changing your behavior. You're not thinking to yourself, oh, we should go with the Explorer instead of the Expedition because gas is just going to be too expensive on one of those. If oil is in this range, essentially what it means is it doesn't act as a tax on consumer behavior. It doesn't make you change what you're doing. And the key level appears to be as long as a gallon of gas costs less than a regular Starbucks latte, nobody cares. That's it. It's really just that simple. So on the consumer side, oil in this range doesn't really affect you day to day. Now, if gasoline gets back around $4 a gallon, will that affect you? Yeah, you'll start to feel it. You'll talk about it at Thanksgiving. It'll come up at the office. You're not going to believe what I paid today when I filled up. But for right now, on the consumption side, oil is in what I'd call this nice sweet spot where it's not affecting consumers. But what about producers? What about on the production side? Well, I already told you when the price of oil went to $30 a barrel back in 2015, 2016, the Russian economy went into recession. Because you may not know this, but Russia only produces two things, two industries in Russia. There's oil and gas, and there's fake news. And those are the two things they make. And they don't make anything else. So their economy is extremely sensitive to the price of oil. And so, I already told you, when the price of oil went all the way down to $30 a barrel, the Russian economy went into the deepest recession it had seen in the post-Glasnost era. Who in this world knows what Glasnost is? Please just some of you tell me you've heard that word. Because if I was talking to 25-year-olds, they would say, what is that? So, yeah, the gentleman back there, he has no idea. He's looking it up on the internet right now. Now, there he is. He's doing it. So, oil prices start to come back up. And remember I told you, Russia's economy recovered last year. You see, with oil prices in this range, large oil-producing economies suddenly start to experience growth again. Countries like Russia, countries like Saudi Arabia. You see, in 2015, Saudi Arabia was also in really big trouble economically as well. You want to know how bad it got in Saudi Arabia in 2015? They had to let women drive. That is how bad it got. Now notice the price of oil goes back up. All that talk of reform in Saudi Arabia, right out the door. They start killing dissidents again. All that, I think they'll still let women drive. But other than that, all that reform off the table. But the economic point is this. Oil at this range means that on the consumption side, it's not acting as a tax on consumer behavior. But on the production side, countries that depend on oil for their GDP, for their growth, the price is high enough that they can grow again. So last year, I believe the main driver behind synchronized global growth was this moderating effect that oil prices suddenly had on the global economy. And again, it's coming from U.S. production. Now, why am I saying that? Well, U.S. production peaked in 2015. Something called the rig count. I don't know if you know what the rig count, but there's something called the rig count that counts every oil-producing well in the United States. So back in 2015, the rig count in this country peaked. There were 1,500 oil wells pumping back in 2015. I'm guessing some of you were thinking of pulling the peach trees out of your yard and just seeing, hey, maybe we've got oil here too, right? Because the price of oil was so high. But the interesting thing about U.S. production, and this is really for the economic geeks out here, U.S. production is extremely responsive to a price change. It's very responsive to a price change. So what that means is this. In a place like Russia or Saudi Arabia, they pump as much oil as they can all the time. All that OPEC talk about restricting supply, that is window dressing. They have to pump as hard as they possibly can because it's the only industry they have. If they stop pumping, they starve. Does everybody get that? So in the U.S., though, we have a totally different kind of production. It's pretty much all in private hands. It's not in government hands. So basic supply and demand. When the price of oil gets high, the rig count goes up, and everybody's pumping like crazy. If you increase supply, though, over time, what's going to happen to the price? It starts to go down. Exactly what happened. Price goes all the way down to $30 a barrel. The rig count in this country went to 500. It went from 1,500 to 500 in a 2-year period of time. So you know what? Everybody just goes and cuts the switch off. Now, as the price of oil has come back up, what's happened? A cookie for somebody who tells me what's happened to the rig count in the U.S. as the price of oil has come back up. That's right. It's come back up. That's right. It's now sitting at 800, but it's half of where it could be. So if you're thinking oil prices are going to keep going up, every time they go up by $1, 100 oil wells come back online. And so it's a moderating effect now in a way that it wasn't before when all the oil was coming from countries that had a lock on supply. So it's a very different world that we're living in when it comes to oil prices. Now, I told you already, global economy grew 3.7% last year, 2017. At the end of the year, the IMF estimated that the global economy would grow 3.8% this year. And they estimated that there would be this slight increase in growth, and they gave a reason why. They believe that the massive tax cuts that occurred in the United States would stimulate the U.S. economy and the economies of their trading partners. Now, they said this in December. Okay, that was a little while ago. A few things have happened since then, which we'll get to in just a minute. But I want to address very quickly the effects that tax cuts are having on the U.S. economy right now. So again, laying the foundation for what's happening in financial markets. So let's talk a little bit about those tax cuts. And in order to understand them, you really do have to imagine that the law that was passed at the end of last year really wasn't one tax change. It was two. And really, to think about it properly, you have to separate it off into the changes, the true reform, I believe, to the corporate tax rate, as opposed to the changes on the individual side. So really, they're two totally different tax laws. One affects corporations and one affects individuals. So we're going to treat them that way to understand the effects that they're having on the economy. On the corporate side, it was pretty darn simple. You took the highest corporate tax rate all the way down to 21%, right? So you just cut the corporate tax rate in the United States majorly. Now, whether you're in business or not, you understand that if you cut the tax rate, what happens to after-tax profits of every corporate entity in the United States of America? They all go up, right? I mean, totally simple. You cut the tax rate, so the after-tax profits go up, right? That's it. It's just really that simple. Now, if you cut after-tax profits, what effect is that going to have on the future profitability of every corporate entity in the United States? It's going to go up. What does that mean for stock prices in the United States of America? They're all going to go up. And here's the funny thing. I think the stock market in 2017 was the best forecaster of what was going to happen to tax rates. Even before any economist figured it out, the stock market figured out in 2017 that there was going to be a massive tax cut that lifted the profitability of every single corporate entity in the United States of America, and it responded accordingly. So, what happened to stock prices last year? Now, don't answer this question, but is there anybody in this room who lost money in the stock market in 2017? You don't answer me, but let me just tell you that if you did, you either need to fire your financial advisor or go find one. No one should have lost money. It didn't matter if you were small cap, mid cap, large cap, growth, value. It didn't matter the sector, the industry. Everybody made money last year. It looked easy last year. And it was simply because the stock market, and I hate to admit this, is a better economist than I am. It is. That the other thing, never walk away. When you walk out of here, please understand that when I look to see what's happening in the future, I look to financial markets first. They basically tell me about 6 months out where the world is headed. Now, they won't give me the details. That's why you need me. But they will tell you in general, over a 6-month period of time, where the world is headed. So, you could see the stock market in 2017 was predicting you were going to get a big corporate tax cut. Now, the interesting thing about that tax cut is that it couldn't pass the Senate without a process known as reconciliation. Okay? Now, for my church friends in the room, not talking about the sacrament, it was something totally different, right? So, what reconciliation in Washington means is this. That tax cut couldn't pass, the whole package couldn't pass, unless it added no more than 1.5 trillion, with a T, to the deficit over a 10-year period of time. Okay, so 1.5 trillion to the deficit over a 10-year period of time. Now, in the grand scheme of the deficit, what's a trillion here or a trillion there, right, among friends? Not such a big deal. But the reason it's interesting is this. On the corporate side, the corporate tax cut was an unequivocal loss of revenue. Would anybody like to guess by how much it was estimated that the corporate tax cut would result in terms of a loss of revenue? Any guesses? I already told you the number. it wasn't exactly 1.5 trillion. It was like 1.3765. It was like pi. Okay, it was one of those kind of numbers. So it was really close to 1.5 trillion. So let's just round up for our purposes. It will help you understand why, when it came to the individual side, they did some things that they did, right? So on the individual side, unequivocal loss of revenue because you took tax rates down for pretty much everybody in the first couple of years, right? But for every $1 in tax cut on the individual side, you had to have some way to raise revenue by $1 because you already soaked up the 1.5 trillion on the corporate side. So for every tax cut on the individual side, you had to raise revenue somehow. Now, when it comes to taxes, help me out, Paul. How do they raise revenue on the individual side? You got to limit something. You limit deductions. Exactly. And what were the big deductions that they limited? Salt, and they capped the deduction for your mortgage interest. Now, think with me, my friends, for a moment. What sort of parts of the country, what sort of areas, what sort of states, what sort of geography would this kind of tax bill punish? What kind of places? Second homes, yes, spoken like a true South Havener. Yes, second homes, but think geography for a moment. What states have the biggest, yes, exactly. We're talking about big coastal cities with expensive real estate markets. And I'm not talking about like expensive real estate like South Haven, okay? We're not talking like that. We're not talking like, over by the lake versus not. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about places like New York, San Francisco, Boston, Washington, D.C., L.A. Those are the kind of places we're talking about. Now, I will not say this was a nakedly partisan bill, but it was clearly scantily clad. No joke, right? And one of the things, though, that I don't think the crafters of this bill anticipated was how the changes to the tax code would very quickly collide with another large trend in the economy that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and that is household formation by millennials. Now, we only have one millennial in the room. It's that poor guy over there that we're all looking at because we hadn't seen anyone in such a long time. The rest of them are hiding in some classrooms over there. So basically, we got one millennial in the room. So most of us in this room don't know much about them except the ones that are our kids and grandkids. But we do know, if you've got any experience with those millennials, that they are finally starting to do a few things that we thought they would never do. They're moving out of our basements. They're getting their first real jobs, real jobs with real responsibility and commitments. They're starting to have children. They're starting to buy houses. They're starting to find life partners. Now, they do all this stuff in a different pattern than we all did. Okay, they don't do them the same way by any stretch of the imagination. How many millennials have you encountered that are actually willing to buy a house with someone they're not married to? Right? I mean, my husband's still mad he bought the house with me. He's still not happy. He questions the wisdom of that decision all the time. And I'm looking and going, and you're going to buy a house with someone you're not married to, but different generation. Maybe he'll explain it to us later. He'll give like the rebuttal in just a moment, right? But basically, these millennials are all, up until this point, where have your millennial kids and grandkids, for the most part, where have they all wanted to live? They all want to live in cities, right? And they all tell you that they want to live in these big, expensive cities because that's where the jobs are. They're lying to you. They want to live in those cities because that's where Tinder works the best. Okay? And for those of you who don't know what Tinder is, don't look it up on the internet right now once you're looking at me. But basically, in these big cities, once they find their life partner and true love on Tinder, what are they starting to do? They're moving. They're moving. And anybody who's in real estate will tell you they are moving out of those big cities because everybody said they're not going to live in the suburbs. And you know what? The first kid they have, what do? They all think they want a yard. Now, the hilarious thing is the kid's never going to look up from the computer to even know there's a yard out there. But go ahead. You need something to mow on Saturdays, right? So basically, this new tax bill is colliding with these millennials who are just now making their choice about where they're going to live for the next 15 years of their lives. They're moving out of those coastal cities. And where are they going to move? Nashville. That's exactly right. They're moving to Nashville. They're moving to the suburbs of Atlanta. They're moving to Dallas, where the real estate is affordable and the tax burden is low. So, in this country right now, new home sales fell in September by 4% year over year. That's significant. Guess how much they fell in the Northeast? 51%. Yeah, gasp. Okay, if you think you're having trouble selling your house in South Haven, imagine if you were in New Haven, Connecticut. 51% decline in new home sales in the Northeast area. It's already starting to bite. Now, what happens when all those millennials, who I'm guessing you understand typically are slightly less conservative than their grandparents, right? What happens when all those millennials move to places like Nashville and Atlanta and Dallas? You could change the political map of this country, which has been pretty darn reliable for about the last 20 years, in a major way in a very short period of time. And I don't think the legislators who made this bill up ever gave that any thought. And it could come back to bite them much quicker than they ever imagined. But that was last year. And what you really came to talk about, I'm guessing, was this year and what's going on in 2018. So we have set the stage. You understand where the economy is right now. You understand the effects of the tax cuts, but you also understand in economics that those tax cuts were 6 months ago. That's an economic lifetime away. We've felt the effects of those. They're priced into the stock market. Businesses have adjusted. And now we look forward and ask ourselves, what's affecting the economy right now? And what's accounting for volatility in the stock market? I was at a meeting in Barcelona about 2 weeks ago, a real estate meeting, and a gentleman walked up to me. He's got a big real estate practice down in North Carolina, and he said, now you're going to explain to me, aren't you? Isn't it funny when someone with an accent like me makes fun of someone with an accent like me? You're going to explain to me now, aren't you, why my business just stopped 6 weeks ago? And I thought, yeah, actually, I am going to explain it to you. And I'm going to explain it to you because there are 3 things that I really think are going on and are behind this uncertainty. The first one is Brexit. Second one has to do with monetary policy. I told you we would get to that. I will not bore you with quantitative easing. We'll make it quick. And the third thing has to do with what I myself, and I'm going to admit to this, thought would be a very short period of trade tensions with China. And has actually developed into a full-scale trade war, I'm very sorry to say. And I was not calling it a trade war even 2 months ago. But over September, when the full $200 billion worth of tariffs went into effect, it is now pretty much the case that over half of the trade that is transpiring between the U.S. and China is now coming under the cloud of protectionist policies. So I have to call it a trade war, and I use those words very, very carefully, because I don't even like to call it a war, because typically in a war people die, and no one's going to die here, so I don't like to use that word, but I don't have any other choice, and you all know what I'm talking about. So let's talk about the happy stuff. Let's talk first about Brexit, right? Let's talk about Brexit, because Brexit's been on the table since 2016, okay? It's been around for a long time. Why is it affecting markets now? Why is the uncertainty about whether or not Europe and Britain will be able to come up with some sort of deal that allows them to trade with one another? Can they come up with a deal? Why is it on the table? Why is it sort of in the news now? Well, it's finally in the news now because they have a hard deadline. They actually have to come up with a deal by March the 29th of 2019. Now, for many of you in this room, that might not seem like such a long time away, but that's less than 6 months out. Yeah, if you haven't done your Christmas shopping yet, you need to get busy, okay? Because March 29th, 2019 is less than 6 months away. So suddenly, Brexit was sort of this sort of thing that might happen or might not, and we didn't need to worry about it. But suddenly, the hard deadline is upon us. Now, they got 2 choices, deal or no deal. It's really not that hard. No deal means a chaotic exit. Right? Chaotic exit means we have no idea what will actually happen. It means they'll go right down to the wire, they'll stay up until midnight of the night, have no deal, they'll walk away from the table, and suddenly the planes will stop flying. Right? I think that's a very low probability. That's generally not what happens. Now, I think they'll get some sort of deal. It's just probably not going to be the deal that Great Britain wants. Because you see, Great Britain thought they could vote for Brexit and basically get a deal that looks kind of like NAFTA, where they get the benefits. And believe it or not, NAFTA has some benefits. The benefit meaning the free movement of goods and services. They wanted services too, without the free movement of people. They wanted free movement of goods without the free movement of people that they agreed to decades ago. Now, they took this plan, right, called the Checkers Plan. Don't they come up with great names? It's not even spelled like C-H-E-C, not like the burger place. It's got a Q in it. What does that even mean? They take this thing called the Checkers Plan to their friends in Europe, and basically that dishy French Prime Minister Macron stands up and just goes, no, I'm having none of this. And it's funny to me why it is that Great Britain is trying to get this deal and France is saying no. Notice it's not Germany, it's France that's saying no. And I want you to, as you sort of watch this in the news, understand why it is France that says, I won't take a deal, Great Britain, that's good for you, because if I give you that deal, then the Netherlands is going to want it, and Belgium is going to want it. Someday Italy might be less of a basket case, and they might want it, right? France has the greatest incentive to hold the economic union together. And here's why. France remembers why they have it in the first place. It was never about economic union. It was about political union. And if you don't believe me and you can't sleep tonight, go read the Maastricht Treaty. Just go back and read it. And in the very first few paragraphs of the Maastricht Treaty, it sets out, after the Second World War, that the point was political union, not economic union. And they stopped. Now, why would they want political union in Europe? Just two reasons: to constrain Germany and to protect themselves from Russia, which is a constant threat on their eastern front. So, France says, I'm not giving you a deal, Great Britain, that's going to break up the entire union. I'm not going to give you a good deal because I want to constrain Germany and I want to protect myself from a very belligerent Russia. So, do you think they'll get a deal? I do, because they have a hard deadline. It reminds me a lot of Y2K. Remember Y2K? Anybody here still got that generator in the basement? Got the water, the bottled water, the emergency kits that you all stored for Y2K. And the funny thing was, we all held our collective breaths as the clock turned and said, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And what happened? Absolutely nothing. Because when you can see the disaster coming, it typically doesn't end up being a disaster. When we're all prepared for it, it's never a disaster. It's the one that you're not prepared for. It's the one you don't see coming. So the fact that they can see a hard March 29th deadline means, guess what? And when you see it happen, think to yourself, God, Marci's a genius. Think that. And forget if it doesn't happen, right? When you see the deal happen on March 29th at 10:30 p.m. and all those ministers from Europe and they're tired and they come staggering out with the deal, right? And it'll be right at the last minute, and it's not going to be anything Britain wanted, but it will keep them from having a chaotic exit. But in the meantime, what does that uncertainty do for financial markets worldwide? They hate it. They hate uncertainty around Brexit. They also hate uncertainty around monetary policy in the U.S. So I'm going to make this as quick and painless as possible. You need to understand that the U.S. Federal Reserve is slowly raising rates to a more normal level. So we are no longer in a financial crisis. Interest rates at 0 or 0.5 or 1% on the short end do not make sense for an economy like ours any longer. And so the Federal Reserve has to slowly and steadily raise rates. They tell the whole world they're going to do it. But interest rates just now crossed a particular threshold. They just now crossed over 2.5%. Now, why is that relevant for the rest of the world? Why is that causing what I believe or will develop into currency crises already in Turkey, already in Argentina, developing in Italy. In much of the emerging world, suddenly they're experiencing problems, and those problems are because the U.S. central bank is raising rates. In order to understand this, I need some audience assistance. I need two people who are willing to just let me borrow their purses. I won't take anything out of it. I just need it for demonstration purposes. Oh, perfect. These are the perfect purses. Okay. All right. This is the U.S. purse, and this is the emerging market purse. Which country would you like this to be? Pick one. Ecuador, perhaps? No, let's go with the country that's having trouble right now. Let's go with Turkey. Okay, so this is the Turkish purse, and this is the U.S. purse. Okay? You understand this? Now, in this purse over here in the U.S., we pay 1% interest, right? There's no risk. In the Turkish purse, we pay 5% interest. But there's a lot of risk in this purse. Look at all these sequins, okay? There's a lot of risk in this purse. So this is the safe purse, and this is the risky purse, right? Now, some of you in the room might say, I'll take 1% for no risk, right? There's a few people in this room, I know some of you. 1% no risk, yeah, that sounds good. Then there's me over here, right? I'm like, give me the risky 5%. That's me, because I'm in a different place in the life cycle, right? Now, as long as U.S. rates are at 1% no risk, Turkey's at 5% high risk, right? Markets are stable, right? People are choosing. Some people pick this purse, some people pick this purse. But what would happen if the interest rates in the safe countries started to go up? And now maybe they pay 2%. So I've been over here in this 5% risky purse, but now the no-risk purse is paying 2%. Are there some people in the room who might suddenly start to shift over? What about if this purse started to pay 3%? Really attractive. So if this one starts to pay 3%, what's the Turkish purse going to have to do to keep money in their country? Raise rates. Exactly. Interest rates in Argentina are 60% right now. Yes, short-term interest rates, 60%. That's where they are in order. That's why I didn't use Argentina, because I didn't want anybody to steal your purse. Here you go. All right, so thank you very much. So this helps you to understand as you're reading about emerging market crises being related to the change in monetary policy in the United States, just think of the two purses, right? And as interest rates go up in the U.S., through no fault of our own, we're doing the right thing for our economy, but we all know that we're all connected globally, and this has implications for financial markets worldwide. And eventually we will start to feel that in some way, just like we felt the Asia crisis in the late 1990s. These things will come back, and they are unsettling financial markets everywhere. Gets us to number 3, and I think it's the most important in this list, and that is the trade war that is developed between the U.S. and China. Now, back when the tax cuts were passed at the end of last year, I don't know about you, but I thought, great. Tax cuts, wonderful, nice big policy for the administration. It's a great win. The president can play golf for the next 2 years, and we're all safe. This is going to be good. And that was a joke. That is not what happened. Instead, we roll right into January, and the trade war begins with something that most of you may not have noticed, but that was a punitive tariff on solar panels and washing machines. Right? That was the beginning of all this. Now, most of us don't buy washing machines very often, and in Michigan, nobody has solar panels. If you do, you have to turn them into something else when you realize that there's not enough sun here for that. You make yard art out of them and some things like that. So basically, solar panels, washing machines were the beginning. China was like, all right, fine, do it. What's the big deal? But then came steel and aluminum in March. A 25% punitive tariff on steel, 10% on aluminum. And the Chinese said, yeah, that really hurts. And so they retaliated with some tariffs of their own, very targeted, very narrow. They targeted a few things like nuts, fruits, pork, and soybeans. Now, you may not know this, but I do, because as we've already established, I know how to drive a tractor, and I learned from my dad, and my brothers all drive tractors. The U.S. exports 25% of its soybean crop to one country alone, China. It's a lot of edamame. 25%, right, of the U.S. soybean crop is created here and shipped there. So it was a very targeted tariff designed to bite exactly what they intended, which were Midwestern voters. Great, fine, we're rocking along, and the administration says, all right, I'll hit with another $16 billion in July, another $30 billion in August, and finally we get to September where we're at $200 billion and the Chinese have retaliated every single time. And so we find ourselves now living in a world where you have tariffs on over half the trade that is transpiring between our two countries. Now, we need to talk about how that affects the global economy. And in order to do that, I think we ought to sort of imagine what could happen. Now, it feels in this world that we live in now like anything could happen, okay? But really, it's really just three things that can happen. There's only three possibilities. And those three possibilities we're going to talk about in order, and I'm going to take them from least likely to most likely. So least likely to most likely. So the least likely thing that we can happen is over here behind door number one. The least likely option is that the U.S. wins the trade war. Okay? The U.S. wins the trade war. Now, what would winning entail? Exactly. Because I actually had to do a little bit of work to figure out what's the point of all this? Like, what are we trying to do? What's the finish line? What's the goal line look like? What would winning look like? And as best I can tell, there are two goals to the policy. The first part of the policy is to limit the forced technology transfer that is happening when U.S. businesses want to do work in China. So if a U.S. business goes to China and wants to do work, basically the Chinese have put into place rules and regulations and requests that violate the WTO laws on technology transfer. So that's a legitimate concern. And the funny thing is, I think part of it stems from the fact that no one thought when China joined the WTO in 1999, okay, 19 years ago, when China joined the WTO in 1999, no one thought for a moment they would become as economically large as they have. No one thought they would grow that way. China, by the way, is still an economic, tiny, small country when you adjust for their population. Does everybody understand that GDP per person in China is less than Mexico? Probably not as low as Honduras, but less than Mexico. So when you actually look outside of all the Chinese cities that you see in the James Bond movies that make China look like it's this super developed, fabulous place, better than New York City, okay, it's not. You go anywhere outside of that and income plummets. So they're still very poor when you adjust for their population. Their GDP per person, less than Mexico's. They're still a very large economy, but how big would they have to be to truly overtake the U.S.? How big would their economy have to be? Well, their population is 3 times larger than ours, and we have a $20 trillion economy, so how big would their economy have to be for them to be even comparable? $60 trillion. $60 trillion. So just to put it into perspective, and to put this all into a little bit more perspective, had I been giving this talk in 1987, when we all looked, right? 1987. Would I have been talking about China as economically competitive with the U.S.? What would I have been talking about? Hong Kong, maybe, but Japan. I'd have been talking about Japan, right? Now, does everybody understand Japan is still the world's 4th largest? It's actually the 3rd largest if you don't think Europe as a country, right? I mean, and clearly they don't think of themselves as one, so why should we? So, they're still number 3. When was the last time anybody talked about Japanese trade? The Japanese are going to take us over. It's just a matter of time. They're taking our jobs, aren't they? See, again, me talking like people that talk like me. No, that's actually not how it works. In fact, I almost fear that China may be suffering from the same problem Japan did, in that it seems to be a curse that the minute the U.S. starts to think you're an economic rival, you go on the decline. And has it been good for the global economy, for the Japanese economy to go on the decline? Not really. No, not really. And it wouldn't be good for the global economy for China to go on the economic decline as well. Who's going to buy all of our soybeans? Who's going to buy all of our soybeans? Who's going to be part of our integrated global supply chain that provides supplies to companies that employ people in Michigan? But I get a little off course because we need to go back to winning. What does winning mean? Well, winning would mean, number one, that you do something about the technology transfer. I get that, okay? That's a reasonable goal, and there are ways to deal with that in the WTO. But the other goal of all this is to shrink the goods and trade deficit by $200 billion a year. Now, let's talk about what that will mean for everyone in this room if we shrink the trade deficit by $200 billion a year. Let's imagine for just a moment that the only thing that we import from China are shoes. And if you haven't seen my shoes, you need to. So, imagine the only thing we get from China are shoes. We get $200 billion worth of shoes from them every year. How great does that sound? So $200 billion worth of fabulous shoes. And what the administration wants to do is say, no, you're not going to get those $200 billion worth of shoes from China. So what does that mean for me, the shoe importer? Well, it means I either have to get them from another country, right? Because I'm going to get the shoes. Or I get shoes made in America, right? So I get the shoes made here in America. Now, what kind of options am I going to have for shoes made in America? I'm going to be wearing waders the next time you see me, okay? What kind of shoes am I going to get? You can say, well, those jobs would come back, and maybe they would. Perhaps we would begin to make shoes in America again. But somebody tell me, what is the unemployment rate in this country? 3.7%, the lowest rate since 1969. Who was born in 1969? Me! In my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rate in my lifetime. So where are we going to find people who are going to make my shoes? Exactly. Migrants. Yeah, exactly. Maybe the migrants, but there's not even enough of them, okay? Just a digression. Net migration from Mexico is negative into this country, okay? And all the people you're seeing on TV who are sort of coming in caravans, in another 5 years, they stop too. They're gone in 5 years. The minute you get the wall built, you're just going to be holding them in. They're all going to be going the other direction. It's all driven by demographics. And you can watch their demographics. You got a lot of young, unemployed men on your border. They're going to move. The minute they hit 40, guess what? They stop moving. Who moves after 40? Unless it's for a second home. Where'd that person say? Yeah, exactly. So demographically, Mexico's migration's done because their demographics don't support it. Honduras and Guatemala are just demographically about a decade behind Mexico. So you got a few more years and that's over with too. So that's the digression. You won't even get migrants doing it. So what does it mean for me and my shoes? I'm just going to pay more for them. That's it. Would anybody like to guess what's happened to the price of washing machines since January? 13%. They're up 13%. Now, most of us don't buy one every day. It's a large purchase, so you might not notice that price. But what happens when the price of your shoes start to go up? The price of your pool toys, for heaven's sake. The furniture outside when you get ready to buy new pillows next year. And it's all this stuff. So winning means that the price of everything goes up. That's winning. Fortunately, I don't think that's what's going to happen. Which gets me to door number 2. Door number 2 is that we cut a deal with the Chinese. That's door number 2. Now, I got to be honest with you. I thought door number 2 was the most likely outcome just a few weeks ago. I have been saying for months, and again, it is hard for me to admit I'm wrong. Ask anyone who knows me very, very well, right? But I was wrong about this one. I really did think that the negotiations with Mexico and Canada were a template, that NAFTA and the renegotiation to BAFTA or DAFTA or whatever we're going to call it now was how things would go. That we would make a few cosmetic changes around on the end, and we would say everybody wins. Everybody saves face. We have a new deal. We got rid of that old bad NAFTA thing, and we replaced it with something that's not quite NAFTA, but pretty much is NAFTA. And we all save face, and we go home. This is all over and done with. I thought that's what was going to happen. And that's not what has actually happened. You see, I thought we cut a deal pretty quickly, and I think financial markets thought so too, and that's why up until about 2 weeks ago, everything was rocking along fine. But this thing is dragging on. We cut the deal with Mexico and Canada, but there seems to be no movement with China. Which gets me to door number 3, which now appears to be the most likely outcome and it's that we have a long, protracted, keep on going trade war with China. Now, why don't they just give in? Well, why don't they? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, why doesn't China just give in? I mean, it's causing them pain. Does everybody see that their stock market is down by 25% this year? Does everybody understand that their economy is slowing down? I mean, their citizens must be hurting at this point. Why don't they respond to the pain of their citizens? Vote, vote. Oh, they don't vote. Oh, yeah. Does China respond to the pain of its citizens? No, it's not that kind of government. So, and here's the deal. They also have a nationalist movement in their country that makes ours look like a cakewalk. They've been nationalists for hundreds of years. So if I am leader of the Communist Party, if I'm Xi, what do? Xi is not me, Xi is someone else. Who's on Xi? Yeah, let's not do that. Chairman Xi, right? If I'm Chairman Xi, I go to my population and say, can you believe what the bad United States of America is doing to us? The strong Chinese will win. We will prevail. And they go, hey. And they just cut back to eating meat once a week. And no more soybeans. And they can hold out for a really long time. Do I have a Vietnam vet in the room? They can hold on for a really long time. So we just keep going. And the question is, it really comes down to you and I. How long are we going to take the pain? How long do we take the pain? That's really the question that this all comes down to. Because we don't live in China yet. We don't live there yet. And we really do hold the cards this time. So I've sort of laid out for you kind of where the world is. I do think it's the trade tensions and the prospect of it raising the price for every single good or service in the vast supply chain that now is the trade relations between the U.S. and China. And the question is, how long does it last? Financial markets are now telling us it could last much longer than we thought. And so what's the outcome of that? What's the same as winning? Price of everything goes up, and it slowly erodes the purchasing power of every man, woman, and child in this country. If the banking system has 1.8 trillion in excess reserves, that means that instead of loaning the money out, they're holding on to it. So banks basically take in your deposit, right? You deposit your paycheck in, and let's make you rich. You make $20,000 a month. You deposit your $20,000 into the bank, right? You make your $20,000, and then Sylvia, Bank of Sylvia, turns around and she must keep 10% in required reserves. So she keeps $2,000 in required reserves, and she loans out the other 18%. I could do a whole lecture on the money multiplier, but let's save that for another day, right? If she holds on to, say, $4,000, then she has excess reserves, right? Now, what you're saying is, if she starts to make those loans, the supply of loans would increase, and that would push down interest rates. I think the excess reserves are a permanent feature of the banking system now in response to 2007, 2008, 2009. Banks are not going to loan everything out. They've permanently changed the way they do business. And even if the regulatory environment changes, I think you're going to see more, the supply of excess reserves stay high because bank behavior changed 2008, 2009. I think it stays high. Market. First of all, right, exactly, I'd be in my garden clothes right now drinking a glass of wine. That's what I would be doing. I will tell you this, it is that the stock market is the best predictor of the future, which means there is no predictor for the stock market. I'm very sorry to tell you that I actually do think over long periods of time, I'm very comfortable with saying, on average, you should expect your portfolio to return 5%. And I'm pretty conservative. Some people will say 7%, but for my own personal planning, I go with 5%. That's what I like to do. I'm very comfortable with that over a long period of time. What it's going to do next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, you can have anywhere a 5% average over 20 years. You can do that with 20% up, 10% down, all over the place. So actually, predicting the future of the market is, in my mind, my opinion is no better than anyone else's in this room. You ask anyone the same question, and all of our opinions would be equally valid, even someone who didn't even know what the stock market was. And I do want to tell you this. If it matters to you what the stock market does in the next week, the next month, or the next year, you should not have that money in stocks. It should be invested elsewhere, if you care. Now, it's fun just to watch if you like your blood pressure to go up and down and you get off on that. But if you care what happens in the next day, week, or year, that money, and really, conservatively, 5 years, that money shouldn't be in stocks if you need that money. Yes, in the back.
Should we worry about the deficit? And will economic growth take care of the deficit?
Okay, it's a great question. I'll respond to the second half first. Oh my goodness, I hope so. Right? Oh, I would hope so. And I think people have hoped since the 1980s that growth would take care of the deficit. I have only seen the deficit being taken care of one time in my life, and that was 1999, 2000, and 2001. You actually had a surplus in this country in 99, 2000, and 2001. How did that happen? It was a tax increase and a spending cut. No, I wouldn't say those tech companies, they weren't paying taxes. No way. It was all about spending went down and taxes went up. That was the only way you got it. Growth has never taken care of the deficit. Now, that being said, am I personally worried about it? I actually don't worry about it till markets do. I look to markets to tell me if it's a problem or not. And for some reason, the rest of the world is dumb enough to loan us money at almost 0% interest on the short end. And until they tell us they're not going to anymore, we won't do anything about the deficit. Why did we do something about it in 98, 99? Because the long-term treasury, the 30-year treasury, which still existed back then, was at 7%. Long-term interest rates have to start getting in that 6%, 7% range before politicians begin to understand that the carrying cost of that debt is going to eat you alive. Now, I'm here to tell you, I actually believe for a rich country like the United States of America, we could run a surplus every single year. We just choose not to. But we are not a destitute country with poverty-stricken people and no resources. We are still the richest country on the planet. We could run, you've got rich friends, right? You got rich friends who run a deficit all the time, don't you? You just look and know they're spending a little bit more than they make every year, but they're still rich. Is it easier for them to get their spending under control than it is for someone who makes $15,000 a year? Yeah, absolutely. So we're rich. We could do it. We just choose not to. And one of the reasons we choose not to is because interest rates are so low. But I do believe interest rates would take care of it. Now, when that'll happen, again, markets will tell me. I wait for the signal from them. But excellent question. I hope you didn't get in at the top. That's the first thing, okay? Because I think there's a big difference, and I've seen it happen over and over again, between the bubble that develops around a new technology and the way that it affects the economy 10 to 15 to 20 years later. I think cryptocurrencies will eventually, not necessarily the currencies, but the technology that they're based on, blockchain technology. The technology that these cryptocurrencies are based on, it's called blockchain, and basically you do not need to know how it works any more than you need to know how your cell phone works. You just need to know what it can do for you. And what a blockchain technology can do for you is provide a secure ledger of transactions that's immutable and can or can't be anonymous, just depending. So it's a secure ledger of transactions. So we all understand, if you got any counseling, what a ledger of transaction is. Some of you may have one in your purse, right? You remember how we used to write down the ledger of transaction on our checks? Was that secure? No. Was it immutable? No. You could scratch through it and change it, right? So all it is an immutable, secure ledger of transactions. Can you imagine some industries and some businesses that could use a technology like that? Real estate, financial services of all sorts, So just like there was a big boom that somebody mentioned earlier in the 1990s around tech stocks. Did you guys realize that was 18 years ago? But when did that technology, when did all the internet shopping and all that, when did it change your life? When did it make it possible for me to live in South Haven because Amazon could come to my door every day, right? About 6 years ago when you got a little device called a smartphone. So sometimes you need a complementary technology to augment something that exists before the true potential is realized across the economy. And I think blockchains are like that. There's going to be something else, and I wish I knew what it was, but somewhere there's some smart millennial, right? Maybe this guy right here, right? And he's developing something that will augment or work with blockchain technology that will change our lives in ways that no one could have imagined, the way that we would all be transformed by our smartphones. As far as as far as cryptocurrencies go, boom and bust, just like tech stocks in the 90s, the real impact comes 10 years from now. Everybody knows I could talk all night long, but some of us do have to get in bed. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for having me very much.
Thank you.